find how it affects the community, basically. So my topic was how living in America has affected the African American psyche, and we're trying to look at it from all standpoints, and one of those standpoints was religion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're here, obviously, because you're a pastor. So the first question is, um, what was the original religion of the African people?
Obviously, the things I'm giving you is my perspective. There might be others who answer differently. Um, that question is a little bit loaded because I'm not sure there's a such thing as the African people. There's African peoples. So there's different Africans from different backgrounds and different religions. But some of the things that most of the African religions had in common is a adoring of the ancestors. Most African religions had in common some type of sacrifice that's a part of how you relate to God or to the gods. And most African religions have a moral component, which means you're supposed to live right, or what we would call ethics, which is right living. So those are some of the things that original African people had. Generally speaking, African religions also had a high regard for nature, and they saw spiritual things in nature and in natural occurrences.
Yeah. So, next question. Was religion a driving factor for slavery? If so, how was it used?
Was religion a driving factor for slavery?
Yeah, it's more in the sense of when Europeans came over to Africa, was religion something they thought, hey, we can use this to enslave them, or we can find other ways to do it? Was religion one of those things they kind of threw in that list of ways to enslave Africans?
I would say it the way you said it the second time more than the first. Economics is the driving factor of slavery, but religion is used to justify what they knew was wrong. Because you don't have to try to justify things that you know is right. But when you know something is wrong and you intend to do it anyway, now you have to come up with a lot of justifications and explanations as to why it's okay for you to do it anyway. And religion is one of those justifications and explanations. But religion is not what made them want to enslave Africans. Money is what made them want to enslave Africans.
All right. So, after slaves were taken from Africa, it's kind of generally taught that they were kind of force-fed Christianity, or European Christianity, at least. So, in your opinion, what were the benefits of Europeans forcing their version of Christianity on Africans?
Well, let me back up on the premise a little bit because that didn't happen right away. There was a great debate among whites and slave owners about whether Africans should be considered Christians or exposed to Christianity at all, because some thought that if you baptized an African, that made him your brother in Christ, and so now it could eliminate your justification for why it's okay to enslave. So there was a great debate, and there were many, and at the beginning probably most, who used a justification of saying Africans were not on the same level of humanity as Europeans, and therefore should not be baptized or should not be considered Christians, but should be something less than that. Over time, some of the white theologians came up with a version of Christianity that they felt that they could use to help to make Africans to use their faith to make them better slaves. To make them better slaves. If you look at something like the movie Roots and you see Kunta Kinte and the way he rebelled against the idea of being a slave, that was partly based on his understanding of who he was as a man in whatever faith he had before he got here. So leaving them practicing their original religions wasn't working. So they came up with this idea of Christianity that's based on what we now refer to as slave religion, which is not what Christ taught, but is what they taught enslaved Africans. And the purpose of that was to make them better slaves. And then they came out with all these justifications why, even though they were Christians, you could still enslave them.
So, this is kind of more like a objective question, or subjective question.
Sure.
In your opinion, well, first of all, I'll ask you this: do you think religion, like you said, the religion that they taught, enslavers taught, do you think that was used to almost keep like a passive mindset over the slaves, like to kind of to keep them in high faith, to kind of basically they're trying to use religion to trick slaves into thinking that everything was okay, or that sooner or later they'll be in a better place?
Yes, they did. It didn't work as well as the general storyline makes you think it worked. It would make you think that they just exposed enslaved people to this religion and told them that meant they should be slaves, and so then everybody just said, well, okay, I guess that's right. It didn't happen like that. It never was like that. As a matter of fact, the most forceful rebellions against slavery were led by preachers. So that's how they wanted it to work. It never really worked like they wanted it to work, but that's what they tried to do. And it did work some, but not quite in the kind of storybook way that sometimes we imagine. Oh, they gave us this religion and we just swallowed it whole, and all of a sudden we became little lambs and allowed ourselves to be enslaved. That never was the case. That's a mythology. But that's what they wanted to do, yes.
All right, so how do you think religion affects African Americans today?
Well, there's a research, maybe one of the most famous research organizations called the Pew, P-E-W Research Group, who did a study recently and found African Americans are the most religious people in the United States. And they did it based on, surveys and how often you go to church and how often you pray and all that kind of thing. And I think it's a mixed bag. I think you said religion, I'll stick to Christianity. I think it helps us in more ways than we think, but it hurts us in some very big ways also. Let me remind myself what the question is. How does it affect us? So our religion, I'm gonna say it like this: it's a crisis religion. Our practice of it, it's largely based on getting through tough times, getting through rough times, holding on, making a lot out of a little bit. So when we're in tough times, it helps us. It's not as effective across the board when you get out of tough times, but then you're trying to come up to the next level. Our religion hadn't been crafted that way because most of our history has been based on tough times. So in tough times, when it's rough, our religion kicks in and it comes through, and we get through things that a lot of people couldn't get through, and our faith is a part of that. But sometimes when it's time to be more, I'm gonna use the word aggressive, or more proactive about taking ownership and coming, not just getting out of crisis, but coming up onto a higher level of life in terms of standard of living and that kind of thing. The religion has not always served us as well when it's time to do that. I think that's changing though.
And how do you think religion affects the overall African American psyche?
Well, again, when we use a term like that, we have to be careful. Is there a such thing as the African American psyche? We have things in common, but we're also very diverse. But I think it's fairly universal among African Americans that whether you practice a religion right now or not, mama, grandmama, somebody not too far off, granddad did. So it's still very present, even in people who don't always go to church, or even who have decided that they don't really believe the same thing that was passed down to them. Religion is still very present in the minds and hearts of African Americans, and still a very open debate about the questions that you're asking as to its benefits and the ways that maybe it has not benefited us. But it's still a very present reality. And even people who never went to church, or people who maybe even have practiced in a gang or things that really don't have much to do with church, when they die, they want their funeral in a church. So it's still very present, and there's certain moments they want to get married in a church. So I have people who never come to church come and say, "Can we use your church for the wedding?" Right? And a part of me is like, why? You don't use it for anything else. What? And not to be mean, but why does it matter to you? Like, go wherever you go, wherever matters to you. But it does matter. It's still present. It's still there, and but that's diminishing. Every generation is a little less present than it was in the generation before.
I got one more question. It's kind of like a no-brainer question, but I'll just get your opinion on this one. Were Africans allowed to practice religion in general when they first arrived to America? That answer would be no. You kind of already answered that. But
it actually changed. At first, at first they were, and then not as much, and then eventually not at all. Yeah. And that's in the United States of America. Now, when you start to get to places like Cuba and Brazil, and Haiti, where the ratio of Africans to Europeans, Africans were much higher, then you'll find those indigenous beliefs and religious practices were more continuous. And if they let you see it, you'll even see it sometimes if you go to, say, the Geechee Islands or some places of Louisiana and New Orleans. You'll still see it in some of those places. So some was allowed, some was not allowed, and some did it even though it was not allowed. The Gullah Islands, the Geechee people, excuse me.
Well, do you have any other topics, little information that you think you could add to this?
I don't think so, man. These are very powerful questions that you're asking. And I'm sure as you ask other people, you'll get diversity of answers. But they're very important questions that we have to grapple with, and I applaud you for doing it. The book, and this book is probably considered ancient history now, but the book that was the authoritative one when I was in school, and I majored in African American Studies at Morehouse College, was called Slave Religion and It was written by a man. His last name is Rabateau. Rabateau. R-A-B. Can't remember the middle volume, but it's like T-E-A-U at the end. Rabateau. R-A-B-A or E-T-E-A-U. Slave religion. And then there's another one called Black Religion and Black Radicalism, and that actually looks at the relationship, almost the opposite of what you're asking about, between black religion and more extreme or aggressive forms of black activism or radicalism. Black religion and black radicalism. And those were two of the books that were imported.
That's all for me. If you've got anything you want to add.